KnockBack, the retro and nostalgia podcast, is brought to you by, well, you. If you want to learn how to support our show, go to patreon.com/laststandmedia. Greetings and salutations. Welcome back to KnockBack. My name is Colin Moriarty. I'm joined as always by my brother Dagan, the Virgin Moriarty. Dagan, thank you for joining me today, my friend.
Clearly the whore.
The whore. You wish.
I do wish.
How's it going, my friend? How's life?
I got to talk to you about something. I'm going to crack my bubbly here.
Oh, what do you got?
I got a little, what is this? I almost said Perrier, San Pellegrino.
Oh, wow. Look at you.
I'm not allowed to
drink. You always, you have like a selection of drinks at your house like you're at a hotel.
Mm-hmm.
Like you got like Fiji water. Oh, I'm surprised you don't break out the little Coke, the little Coke glass bottles that they give you at like conferences that you only see at conferences. I'm surprised you haven't broken those out yet.
Conference or panel?
Yeah, like panel Pepsis that are some like missed like 7.5 ounces.
I'll get on that. I'm going to get on Amazon.
That'd be sick.
I'll see what I could do about that.
Yeah, what's going on?
I have to talk. Nah, nothing big. I think one of my neighbors is trying to murder me. Other than that,
geez.
Yeah.
Wait, what happened?
This is a thing. This is a thing that's been going on. I've been waiting to talk to you and the audience about this because I wanted to see how it was going to play out.
Is this the guy with the trees?
No.
Oh, okay. He's good.
This is not. I knew you were going to go right to that neighbor because we've had a kind of a contentious relationship. But no, I'm pretty cool with those neighbors these days.
Good.
No, this is a really random one. And I've been waiting to discuss this because I wanted to see if I could get a little step to some sort of clarity, closure, answers, whatever. But so I did get one step closer in a 2 strikes at a 3 sort of scenario. I'll explain. So I go for walks in my neighborhood, right? I go for these brisk walks. I have my pattern set. Doctor recently said, like, it's not enough to go for walks. Like, you got to go. I think I did mention this. You got to go for like brisk, high paced walks, get that heart rate up. So I've been on this thing. Yeah. I've been doing the wiggle.
Yeah.
So the speed walking thing. Sick. I'm like, I really am like 1 step shy of doing the butt wiggle walk. I feel like it's like I should just be jogging on a treadmill. But anyway,
I know you could just get a treadmill, but
could just get a treadmill. I might still go in that direction, but then I wouldn't have these adventures to talk about.
Right.
So there was 2 sets of neighbors. Now, Helene and I, for a little context, a little background, Helene and I have been in this neighborhood. It'll be 12 years in March. So we're coming up on a dozen years that we've been living in this house. When we moved in, it was mostly empty nesters in the neighborhood. I would say probably at that time, 15 to 20 years older than we were. People that had kids in college or older, and they were largely the people that had these houses built and lived here from the beginning of the neighborhood in 1988 to 89. Okay, so OGs. Most of them very friendly, very welcoming. There were 2, and we're kind of situated, Colin knows, like we're kind of situated in a neighborhood down sort of into the heart of the neighborhood. You got to kind of weave and bob to get here. And then we're kind of situated, the house is situated between 2 cul-de-sacs. So down here, I don't know, there's like 20 houses or something, right? Everybody's on a half-acre lot, whatever. Typical suburban joint. There were 2 neighbors. Well, again, everybody was largely welcoming. Welcome to the neighborhood. Nice. I have a couple of neighbors who were closer to mom and dad's age that I feel like took me under their wing and, gave me advice. What do you need type of thing. In a younger man, kind of a mentor-mentee situation. So lovely people, but there were 2 neighbors in particular, 2 sets of neighbors that were more standoffish, aloof, not very welcoming, wouldn't wave when they drove by, those types, and that's okay. It takes all kinds, right? It takes all flavors. You're going to get people like that, whatever. It doesn't matter. It's kind of luck of the draw, right? Your neighbors. One of those sets of neighbors right next to us left. And the funny bit with them was the husband was okay. He would say things that were really uppity and bothered me, but at least he communicated with me. The wife just would not talk, would not wave, never said peep, never said a peep to us in 12 years or 10 years, whenever they moved at that point. We didn't see her or have any words of conversation with her at all until she brought us some mail that was misdelivered to her house weeks before they moved. That was the first time I ever had any kind of dialogue with this woman.
Interesting. On the way out.
But they're gone. So the one neighbor on the
that happened in like the epilogue of that. Particular. Right.
Exactly.
Right. So now you're on to the next. Now you're on to the prologue of the new one. Yeah. Okay.
Exactly.
Okay. All right.
These other neighbors are still in the neighborhood. We never really have any we never have any reason to really hang out or be around these people because they don't have kids. We're not at the bus stop. I understand they're older. They're, you could see their grown kids coming to visit maybe with their grandkids. I don't know. I don't really pay attention, but they're not very friendly people. They live right between two of our friends, actually. Just never have any communication with them. But I think it's kind of rude when they drive by, they never wave and everything.
Yeah,
then you kind of get into the rhythm of, okay, I'm not going to wave anymore. And it's kind of shitty, but I'm not going to go out of my way to be friendly when they've never been friendly, that type of thing. Right? You play the game. So the thing, and I was trying to think of a reason for this, like what set this off. And I did think of one incident. So lately I've been taking these walks, and the standoffish man that lives in this house, the husband, he was driving towards me as I'm going for my walk. Now I'm not one of those persons that hogs the road. I stay close, I'm right on the grass line. My neighborhood doesn't have sidewalks or anything like that. It's very naturalistic, like where we grew up, right? The street lights are few and far between. They try to keep a natural vibe, a rural vibe to the neighborhood. So there's no sidewalks, no curbs and stuff like that. But I walk very close to the grass line. There's plenty of room down the main thoroughfares for a to and fro lane of traffic. I see this guy coming at me. I recognize his car. And he's coming fast down a 25-mile-an-hour road.
Coming in hot.
He's coming in hot. He's going at least 45 to 50, right? Which is fine. And I see that enough, although it bothers me. Now, he's coming up on a blind curve. I'm on the left-hand side, so he's driving at me, so he's on the same side. He zooms by me 45 miles an hour and doesn't give me a berth. I mean, his rear view mirror is within inches of me. So I'm like, what the fuck? So I'm like, is it possible that he didn't see me? I mean, I was far enough away, broad daylight. I'm thinking like this guy just buzzed the tower. You know what I mean? Like he just came way, way too close and he did it on purpose. But it's a one-time thing. It's an anomaly. Let me pay attention if this happens again. So lo and behold, a week later, happens again. Now I go for walks on random times. It's not the same time all the time. So if he's coming and going from work or something like that, we just happen to have another random encounter, right? Does the same exact shit. He comes at me really fast, doesn't give me any berth whatsoever. There's no car coming the other way. There was no reason. It's a low traffic time of day, 2:30, 3 o'clock, something like that. There was no reason. And there's no way he didn't see me. If this guy has the vision to drive an automobile, he had to have seen me if his eyes were open, right? This isn't Stevie Wonder, right? The guy's driving. He can't be blind, right? So I'm like, all right, now this happened twice. What the fuck? And I got pissed. I knew, and now I know who he is. And I turn around, I was like, fucking asshole or something like that. Like I got pissed off, said something loud enough for him to hear, turned around, and I'm thinking the guy's going to stop. We're going to have words. But I was pissed, So now, and this was probably about 2 weeks ago, and I wanted to see, third time being the charm, 3 strikes, you're out, whatever. Really been waiting for this third time to get full-on proof that this guy is being pissy with me, aka maybe half trying to kill me, smack me with his rearview mirror, whatever it is. And I'm thinking, like, what? I understand this guy's always been a little aloof since we moved in, but did I do something specific to piss him off? Him not really, that family not being in our orbit, as I mentioned at all, right? So I think back to, I believe, the summertime. And one of their grown kids or somebody that comes to and fro from the house often, I think it's somebody related to them, but I don't know. It could be a friend. It could be a cleaning lady. I have no idea. Came zooming down the road leading to my cul-de-sac, the front of my house. And I didn't know who it was. It was a car that I didn't actually recognize. And I was like, asshole, like slow down. Because the dude was driving and these kids playing in the streets. I don't even know if my kids were outside, but my neighbor's kids were outside. There's kids hustling and bustling, riding their scooters or whatever. And I screamed at this person. I was like, yo, slow the fuck down, or, asshole, whatever I said. So it could be stemming from that incident, but I don't know, because that was also 2 or 3 months ago. But anyway, so I'm thinking like, so
you might have answered your own question a little bit.
It might be from that. Now the guy's definitely.
It was that guy that you yelled at?
It was somebody associated with that guy.
Okay, so yeah, all right. So we're getting closer now.
Yeah, one of his grown. I'm assuming it's one of his grown children. I don't even know the family dynamic of how many kids they had, because they were empty. Again, they were empty nesters.
And you called him an asshole, like very Long Island. Yeah, that's good.
I called him an asshole on the second buzz, and then I called in the summer. I'm thinking back in the summer, I had that incident where I called that person affiliated with him, probably one of his, his daughter or something.
An asshole.
An asshole for speeding down.
Very long. I like it. Now, I think you might have drawn the right conclusion that this guy has a little bit of a vendetta.
Yeah, I think he might be. Yeah, he's playing a dangerous game. He could, you know what I mean? Are we doing murder over this? Is this where you know what I mean? Like maybe vehicular homicide?
Manslaughter at the very least. I mean, I wrote down a few options for you.
Okay,
Number one,
please.
caltrops. Next time you see him come down the street, just drop a few caltrops on the road. When he comes down, fuck his tires up.
That's a spike strip?
Just the little ninja ones that look like jacks.
Oh, I know the ones you're talking about.
Yeah. Like that Tenchu would use? Those. The second thing you could do, you want to be real slick when he gets by you, a little magnet sensor, you put him on in his car and you track him. Try to, it comes by you real quick. You're just like, oh, okay, pip. Put that right on his, under the wheel well or something when he's coming by or doing something like that. It might be a little difficult to do that, but you track him. Maybe he's having an affair or something. You nail him that way.
Oh,
the third thing you do is, I used to ask Dad, why do you keep a knife, like a huge army dagger in your car? And he would say that there was a time where a truck got so close to him that he pulled out his knife and threatened to stab the dude's tire while he was driving. And that's why he drives that's why he had this Bowie knife. And so
I didn't know about this.
Yeah. So you could just, Dad comes out with these stories. Like Dad will say things where it's like, why didn't you ever say that before? That never came up. That never came. It's like the story he told when he drove his truck all the way from Queens without brakes. It's like, how does that story not come up every month?
Love that story.
One of the great stories of all time.
Absolutely love that story.
And shout out Dad. He was just here. He was saying how much he enjoys listening to the show, even though we throw him. I find a way to throw him under the bus every time.
But these are the three options for me.
Well, I don't want to say the three. I just want to say those are three options.
Those are
caltrops.
Yeah.
Tracking magnet, playing the long game. Maybe you find him doing something untoward. Yeah. Or you just take out the knife, stab that tire as he comes by, skids out, crashes into the stop sign. He gets out of the car, ready to go, and you fucking fight. No melee combat. We're getting rid of that immediately. That's not. So the knife's not an option. Then you don't want to introduce the knife into the fight. I'm not saying that. I want to say you want to use it like Dad would use the knife on that 18-wheeler that was getting too close to him on the Long Island Expressway in 1980 or whatever the fuck.
Absolutely.
Story that was.
I love that. And I wish I could, I honor, but I also have to honor the differences between me and Dad. That's going to end up in me getting my ass kicked. So that's out. I love the extortion angle. Love it.
Total. Yeah. I mean, that's nice. There's an option to that. It gives you a lot of power. I love
the craziness of somebody that goes for a walk equipped with caltrops, because that is going to put the fear of God into this guy. If I was that prepared for an encounter with this guy, that because no one's going for. I'm going for a walk. It's a walk. It's a lovely thing. No one goes equipped with ninja weapons. But I love the fear of God that would instill in an enemy. In this case,
right, because he's almost home, right? And he maybe gets a little message. His tires lose a little bit of pressure. He gets home and he looks what's in it. And he's like, oh, I probably ran over a nail or piece of glass. And he looks and he's like, what are those? And they're the finest metallurgical Japanese metalsmith caltrops. And he's like, who is out for me? And that would check him, who made this? And this was made in like a Kyoto blacksmith. And it has a secret mark on it. And he does all this investigation on it. And he finds all this crazy shit about you. that you just made up, like you're part of a secret organization. Yeah.
I mean, if we could kind of somehow couple this with a blow dart or a dagger with a message on it, I mean, I don't know how you don't go for option A. I mean, I'm in love with this option. I'm gonna keep you guys posted on this because this happens a third time. It's gotta result in some kind of confrontation. I mean, how can it not? I would assume so.
Well, right. I mean, that's what I'm saying is like, I always love thinking about all the things we imagine.
Yeah.
And I think we imagine most of the things that happen in our lives in some way, someone's perception or someone. But I do think that things happen where you're like, no, there's no doubt. I'm not going to be gaslit into thinking that this didn't actually occur multiple times. And it's so funny, Dave, how simpatico we always are, because I was going to bring up something about my neighbors today.
Oh, please.
In the sense that I live in a similar cul-de-sac type neighborhood or whatever.
Yeah. And
I have a friendly relationship with people, first name basis to some people. I mean, I'm not hanging out with anyone, but there are these people that I've noticed they like all gather together and hang out around this one corner where I walk the dogs all over the place. And the last like few times I've gone by them, and this goes into like perception versus reality, I feel like they've really given me the cold shoulder and been like very brusque with me. You know, they sit out there, like gather, watch football, hang out or whatever. And it's usually like very friendly, but now it's like barely an acknowledgement. And part of me is like, okay, so there's a few things here. Number one, especially this one woman, like definitely, that's why I'm like, this one woman is so cold to me now that like something happened and I don't know what it is. So because she like came up to me in the supermarket once to say hello to me and stuff. And I was like, okay. So now she like doesn't even really seem to want to talk to me at all anymore. And so there's a few things that I think could have happened.
Okay.
And number one is that I don't think there are even a few things. I think it's one thing. Is it possible that someone has figured out who I am and has somehow listened to a show where some story has come up that are offended by? I don't think I've talked. I think I've said many nice things about my neighbors. I've said a few things about my neighbors that, you know, they're a little crazy. Like what? And the one thing I was thinking about was how a lot of them were kind of half joking about asking to use the pool when it was being built. And I think that came up on the show once. And so perception versus reality, that's my struggle right now, because I had this other thing. Remember when I was telling you that I caught the woman's dog pooping on the lawn?
Yes.
And I saw that woman today with Micah, and she was super friendly to us. Like we had this awkward thing where I was like avoiding her, where I was like, oh my God, she's like down the street. I'm just going to go this way and like walk with her. Because it was just awkward because I caught her dog and she was in this, but she was like really nice to me. So I said when we passed by her with Micah, I'm like, that's ameliorated. Like it's done. We're good with that woman now. Like we can just move forward with that woman.
Okay.
But now we have this other thing brewing. And I can't figure out what it is except for me to. And the other thing, the other option was I was like, did I turn these people down too many times? Because they did ask me to hang out a bunch of times. And I'm like, no, I'm just hanging out. You know, they're like, yo, you want to watch the game? I'm like, Sundays. But the answer is that I really don't. Like, I don't. No, it's not offensive. I'm sure you're very nice people. In fact, I might be good friends with you.
Sure.
But I don't even want to hang out with my real friends. You know, like. I have real friends that I have like an affinity for and some sort of legacy with and some sort of affiliation with, and I barely talk to them.
Yes.
So I'm not going to like start erecting new relationships around the neighborhood, except for the neighbors across the street who we really like, the lesbian couple across the street. We like them. We like everyone, but we like them. We have a good friend, like a building friendship with the lesbian couple across the street, where I think we're going to become personal friends.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, but
that's cool.
They're fun.
Somebody, yeah,
they're fun. But so it's so funny you brought that up with your neighbors, because I was going to bring up this, not the same thing, but a similar story where I was like, I don't know what I did. I don't think the only other thing I can think of is that I smoke weed. So. And it's prescription, by the way. In Virginia, I have a medical marijuana license. I can actually grow it in my yard if I wanted to, which would be fucking even funnier. And I think I might actually start doing that next year because it's legal in Virginia as of January 1st for everyone. So I might start growing my own
to grow it.
Yeah. But but I float around in the pool and smoke a joint sometimes. I mean, the pool's obviously closed now, but I've done that many, many times. And I'm like, is that offensive to them somehow or whatever? And I'm like, and I know I have that very California sensibility. I lived there for a long time and definitely took advantage of that reality there. That medical marijuana has been legal there since 1996, which I think really blows people away. It's been so long. And so there's a huge culture there for it.
Yeah.
And And I remember when Allie came and visited and I was smoking a joint walking down the street, as I've said before, and we would walk by some cops and she was like astonished. I'm like, I'm telling you, no one cares. It's fine. It's legal. Don't worry about it. Like she had never been in a situation where it's like, you're just allowed to do it.
It's okay.
And I'm like, really? No, I'm not just bullshitting you. It's fine. And so I know I have that mentality, and maybe that's offensive to some of the Southern sensibilities here, but those are the only things I can think of. The only thing I know for sure is that those few people are not as nice to me as they used to be. And I definitely didn't do anything personally to them. Like, I'm sure I am very overly nice to people, actually.
Yeah.
Like, I tell Micah, and she always notices too, like I play a person when I meet people, like when there's a lot of kids in the neighborhood. I don't really like kids, to be honest. But I force myself to be like, hey, how's it going? You know, when you see them, we're like, hey, how's it, you know, like be like real personable with it, just to be, you know, because you don't want to be the asshole neighbor. So I try to be as cool and nice as possible to everyone.
Yeah.
So
there's always that one neighbor that the kids never knew.
Mm-hmm.
I could think of the one growing up on our block on Neighbor Avenue, Medford. Like there was a neighbor at the edge of the block, a couple doors down from John on that side of the street that I never knew. All the years I lived there, and then all the years I would come back and visit my two best friends that still lived on the block. They never interacted. Yeah, so you don't want to be that creepy,
right?
Couple,
right? I try to be, you know, personable and all of that. So it's like, I don't know.
It's not. You didn't shift your attitude. I know you too well for that.
I didn't. No, for sure.
You do have a big enough internet presence, especially with Sacred Symbols, where they could be listening to you because they have a star on their block. I mean, it's an internet star. I know it's not Brad Pitt, it's not Leo DiCaprio, but you do have some sort of celebrity, you know? So there is somebody famous living on their block. So if they're listening in,
who knows how they even figured it out, you know? Like,
see, I could see that being a big thing with big YouTubers or podcasters, because it probably starts off as a thing of like recognizing in an exciting way, like, oh, so-and-so lives on the block, like Joe Rogan, Colin Moriarty, whoever, right? Red Letter Media, whoever. So sick. Like we could listen to them. Like, we feel like we know, we know this person, you know? And then if they get to listening to you and you start to say things that they don't like, I could see the milk turning a little sour. I don't know. I mean, I think that's a little much, but if somebody's a little overly sensitive or whatever.
Well, that's why I'm just like, perception versus reality. I just don't know. Do I really believe that someone sat here and listened to this shit and got and some, maybe I don't know. It's possible. It's possible.
Even if they're not interested in video games, like you're a celebrity living on their block. So it's like, I want to see, you know, they want to be a part of that. They want to get an earful of that. But I do think I'm leaning towards the kind of, not accepting the invitations over and over.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's
you know what you got to do, man. You got to give them a rain check. And I know you don't want to do this, but if you want to keep things on the up and up with these people, maybe you don't even care enough with these people. You just like, maybe it's like a free, like it's a little like free, like I don't have to deal with this person. So, you know, great. God bless. But if you did want to keep it on the up and up with this specific household, you got to say like, look, I can't, but like 3 weeks from now, why don't you guys pop over and, you know, we'll get a pizza and we'll watch the game, whatever. 9 times out of 10, they're not going to take you up on it. Right. But if they remember, if it doesn't come up again and they remember and they call you out like the day before, like Thursday night, they're like, oh, it's that Friday night, you know, the Jets are playing the so-and-sos, like, let's get that pizza. Hang out with them the one time and then get out of Dodge as quick as possible, because that's fucking creepy as shit. You'll kill 2 birds with 1 stone.
Yeah, you'll know for sure. Yeah,
right?
That's interesting. Yeah, because a guy down the street from me too, who's a perfectly nice guy, he asked me if I wanted to like join some neighborhood group to play fantasy football or something, and I'm like, no,
okay.
I appreciate it, dude. I'm in my own leagues and all that, and then like that guy barely acknowledges me anymore too, and it's like, I don't know why. Like, why do I have to say I have to like be so friendly with everyone? I'm friendly, but I don't want to be everyone's friends, because that to me is too weird. You know, I don't want to. I'm not fucking 15 years old. I don't need my friend next door to me anymore. I don't want that. I need space from people. So anyway, it's funny that you brought that up. But let's move on to the topic at hand. We're going long here. I'm sorry about that. All right, and we're recording this and publishing this, by the way, on Halloween.
Yeah,
we're publishing it late. We're sorry about that. We had a few scheduling snafus that we had to work through. And by the way, we did do all horror movies in October, November. We're going to do all albums. So you guys have that to look forward to as well. But I wanted to call this movie out, The Cabin in the Woods. I didn't know anything about this movie. This is where, and I wrote here in my notes, I want to make sure that I open with this. It's just the idea of ignorance being bliss. I really didn't know anything about this movie. I remembered the poster, maybe seeing it in the theaters or something, or with the cabin and a bunch of different views of it. It looks like a Rubik's Cube kind of.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
And so I remember that, but going into it, I even reading the synopsis on Amazon when I rented it, I read it. And by the way, I looked for it on Netflix first to see if it was on there. And I just love the algorithm because they brought up The Shack, which I thought was so funny. Like this movie called The Shack. It's like you search for Cabin in the Woods. Did you mean The Shack? No, I certainly didn't.
It's not even close.
Yeah, it's like maybe this is like some budget spinoff of it or something. But with Cabin in the Woods, I went in really expecting, I don't know what I was expecting. I was expecting something very traditional. I thought what it was going to be, actually, I don't know why I thought this, but what I thought it was going to be was a very well-made, archetypical slasher film that was supposed to just be really good. That's how I kind of interpreted it. I don't know why. It's very similar to when we did Lost, and I talked about how I interpreted the commercials for the first season as being some sort of like romantic island weird thing, and it's like not that at all. So my interpretation of it obviously was totally wrong, and what I ended up finding on the other side of it was what I think is a really, really good movie. Really clever, some pretty good performances, and funny. And I just think it really does show the value, though it is a double-edged sword, because how are you fully aware of anything if you don't try to become aware of things? But having avoided what that movie even was, I don't know if you could have even spoiled it for me, because I wouldn't even have the perception you were saying anything about this movie. So I don't know, man. I'm very interested to see what you had to say about this, especially because you chose this one. You wanted to do Cabin in the Woods, and I was happy to do it because I never saw it, and neither of you. So talk to me about this. 2012, this movie came out.
Yeah, I thought this would be a fun one to go out with for our KnockBack Halloween 2022 sort of series. And, we did a bunch of iconic horror movies. We did Poltergeist in the past. We did Rosemary's Baby in the past. Then this year we did The Shining, did The Omen, we did Texas Chainsaw, we did The Exorcist. And we had all, the common thread was we had seen all of those movies before. We were revisiting those. So I thought to myself, what can we do that neither of us have seen yet? Something new, something fresh to both of us, if anything. I didn't even know that we could go down that road, but I wanted to see. And then for me, I was going to go out with either this ultimately or Amityville Horror, the original, and do a Long Island spin, right? Yeah. But we could always go, we'll do Amityville Horror. We're going to get there next year.
Cocktober's to come. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. But then I was thinking of The Cabin in the Woods, and thinking back, this movie's a decade old. Of course, we know it was shot in 2009 and put in the can and left there for 2 or 3 years until Lionsgate unearthed it, and that whole story, which is really interesting. I don't know why they didn't have faith in this movie, because I think it's wonderful. But I had remembered I worked with this dude years ago, an animator. He was actually an editor, I believe. And really cool guy, really big pop culture guy. I remember he was a notorious Star Wars fan and Star Trek fan, which I always had a bone of contention with. I was
that's weird.
Pick one or the other. And he had a big bone of contention with me, playfully, because I hated Star Trek so much. But he was always on the pop culture sort of cutting edge. He was really into toys, and he when this movie, now I had already thought this couldn't have been 2012. It had to be more recent. I would say maybe 2015 or 2016. So maybe it was the advent of getting a certain edition of this film on Blu-ray or something. But he went through a certain amount of weeks worth period, like 2 or 3 weeks. It could have even been a matter of a month or two, where he was raving about this movie every day at work. The Cabin in the Woods. It's amazing. It's so clever. It's so witty. This movie changed horror films. He would just go on and on and on about how great it was. So it was always on my radar of I got to check that out. And I never really, like you, Kyle, I never really knew what it was. Is it a horror thing? I knew it had some kind of dark comedy elements. I knew Joss Whedon was involved. But even for me, that even piqued my curiosity even more so, because I never really was a Buffy guy. Angel, Not at all Firefly. I completely
Firefly
missed.
was the only thing that Whedon thing I was really.
I've been remiss on Firefly. I got to definitely visit Firefly. And even I think the only Whedon vehicles that I really was, that I knew was the original Avengers and then Avengers Age of Ultron. Those are only two Joss Whedon things I knew, but I knew of him. And I knew of his, that, he was this young, clever writer. I thought about him in the same breath as like a Dan Harmon or something, like somebody like this youngish, half young writer who was kind of breathing new life into Hollywood. Right.
Yeah. He apparently did writing on Speed and shit like that, which is kind of cool.
Yeah. He was like a script doctor. I think he was uncredited on a lot of things. He had a lot of kind of half came out of the Spielberg camp under J.J. Abrams. So kind of a mentor, a mentee to a mentee type of thing, but kind of in that Spielberg lineage. Really interesting dude. And then, so I was like, it would be cool. Let's kind of do Cabin in the Woods. It's, first of all, happily it fit into that 10-year knockback rule, right? It's old enough to talk about now, which is crazy to think about. So, that was the crazy thing. Now, this guy, Tom, that I talk about, who was always raving about this movie, the craziest thing. We were supposed to do this episode on Friday, and then our schedules got messed around, and I had technical difficulties over the weekend. But the Thursday, in other words, the day before we were originally going to do this episode, Tom emails me out of the blue. I hadn't heard from this guy in 6-7 years. And he's like, do you want to go out for drinks tonight? It was almost as weird as, I don't even know if I forgot to mention this to you, Kyle. The day before we did The Omen, I got an authentication code, or it was that morning, actually.
I don't even want to know.
Of 666-666.
Don't say it.
Come on. I literally said out loud, come on. That's not even, this was like 3 hours before we recorded The Omen episode. I don't know how I didn't mention that. But isn't that funny? So this guy kind of comes back into my life right when we're about to talk about him, his beloved The Cabin in the Woods. And what I found was a lot of fun. I have to say from the beginning, though, I didn't really know about, I kind of knew at an arm's length about all the Joss Whedon. I thought it was more of a Me Too, typical Me Too sexual harassment controversy, but apparently this guy's a real shitty. I think it was more of like a bullying thing.
Yeah, it was
verbal and actual physical abuse.
Yeah, like he's just an asshole on set. I mean, maybe both, but yeah,
it was so bad. Right, Kyle? It was so bad that I heard, you guys have to look this up. I normally wouldn't do this, but there's a Kevin Smith rant, anti-Joss Whedon rant on YouTube. That's like 5 minutes long. We know Kevin Smith. He's very diplomatic. He's very lovable. He's a friendly, affable dude. He goes off on Joss Whedon for 5 minutes. And that was kind of the beginning of me learning. I took the week to kind of learn about the specifics, the particulars of this Joss Whedon thing with Buffy, with everybody he's worked with and everybody who he's, run afoul of. And I have to say, man, I almost texted you at the beginning and it was like, I don't know. I don't even know. I'm seeing Kevin Smith get this upset about somebody. Should we be doing this episode? And then I got to, you get your head on straight and you're like, okay, it's like MJ. We did the Thriller album. It's like, is it possible? And I don't know if it's always possible, but can we separate the art from the artist? He co-wrote this. There's a lot of other players involved. You have Drew Goddard and you have the players and you have all the other people involved. So Whedon, I wasn't sure if you wanted to go into that, but wasn't it interesting that I actually almost called it? I was like, I don't know, maybe we should switch it or maybe you should pick because I got to delve deeper into the Whedon thing. That was my initial thought before I kind of studied up over the course of the week. But man, I have to say, just my brief education on Joss Whedon leading up to this, he seems like he really does seem like an asshole.
Yeah, I don't know the whole story with him, so I'm writing it down to make sure we visit it. So we make sure we talk about it because my whole thing is that no one is going to be off limits to an episode of Knockback based on behavior of someone that wrote it or did something. We won't do Mein Kampf. How's that? We won't do a
That's where you draw the line the same.
But no, like think about it. Like think about all the movies. Didn't we do what the hell is we did a movie with Rosemary's Baby.
Sure.
That's arguably worse.
Yeah.
Than
absolutely.
This.
That's a great one. I never think of that one. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, of course.
Why can't I think of that dude's name?
Oh, the director.
Yeah.
Give me a second.
I'm gonna look.
You have to look it up.
Rosemary's Baby. It's crazy that I can't think about it.
That's terrible. That's
Roman Polanski. Roman
Polanski.
People are like, Roman Polanski.
Polanski, you idiots.
Give me a break. I'm not in that mode right now. I can't. I'm not encyclopedic with that kind of stuff. Very limited and less useful things. Ask me, and I can probably encyclopedically talk to you about them. Okay, so let's get into the story itself. What I think is interesting about this, and I was watching it. It's a brisk hour and a half long, a little more. Is I think this movie actually could have ended multiple times, and I wonder if you saw that too, and if I have one problem actually with the movie, it's that they tell you too much. I was thinking about you a lot, obviously listening to it, watching it, because it felt very Spielbergian to me.
Yes.
And I found that, I don't know if that's part of the meta of the movie, because there's definitely a deep multi-level meta with the movie. Definitely. And it's unclear what's even real and what's actually going on and who these different organizations are. And there's a lot of questions and plot holes. And I don't think it's necessarily about any of those things. So I don't know if you should read into these specific things too much. But I just felt like they put if there's one error the movie made, it's they put too fine of a point on everything. It was actually really mysterious and fucked up the less they said. And so I was wondering if you got that vibe too, that they kind of put too fine of a point on it. And especially there's that one shot, especially when they pull back, when they're in the elevator and they pull back and there are all the monsters and all the different boxes. I was like, just end it. That's the end. Right. And it reads like a Black Mirror episode, basically.
Sure.
And there were multiple other times too, but I felt like they got too cute with it. Like they were almost trying to set something up. And I know that they weren't. I don't know if there's any sequels or remakes or anything like that. But to me, I just feel like they might have gone a little too far with it. And I think more mystery would have benefited the story more. But otherwise, I think it's really a clever thing. So did you get that vibe too, that Spielbergian kind of vibe?
Definitely. I got that Spielberg flavor just with, the cleverness and the ideas and the thoughtfulness that seem to go into everything. And, just a very witty premise of like, how do we explain the stereotypes, the cliches, the tropes, the archetypes of horror, and why is horror always like this? And then kind of turning it on the audience and that whole thing. But you're absolutely right. Like they could have, it is the type of thing where they do put the pretty bow on the ending. It's not a sentimental ending. It's a catastrophic ending. And I think that even makes it even cuter. But yeah, they kind of went to great lengths to almost over explain. You're absolutely right. I wasn't even thinking of that. They could have pumped the brakes at any time after a certain beat. You're absolutely right. But
yeah, it's like, well, it just felt like, it's like, don't you get it? It's the underworld. Like, I know, man, I get it.
Yeah, they were beating you over that. But I feel, and you know what? That's where it didn't bother me because I really did think it was very cute. But they seem to be saying after a certain amount in that, like, no, we have more cute stuff to tell you. We have more cute beats and more cute ideas that we have to share. So, they had to, it was a cleverness bomb. It was like, no, look, seriously, look how clever we are. Look how witty we are. It didn't bother me. I kind of found it. I found that to be a joyful experience, and I do think it's clever. But yeah, absolutely, they could have pumped the brakes a little bit and showed a little more restraint, I guess, and that would have probably could have been just as effective, if not more effective, But instead, they went for this. I guess they went for this very over. Like how could they, if they pumped the brakes, then they wouldn't be able to introduce Sigourney Weaver as like the final girl,
right?
Type of thing.
It was cool to see her.
They had to do they had too much, they were having too much fun almost, but that's okay. I'll take fun rather than a slog. And it was short, $1:35. I was actually really surprised about that. Even watching it, this was one of the few things I got to watch with Helene. She was interested in seeing it too, and she liked it. But that was another thing too, where it just, the whole viewing experience, especially watching with somebody else, it was a little different for me because I don't usually do that. It's usually a solo effort for me. Went quick. It definitely went quick. And then it also occurred to me, Kyle, like, I'm not sure. Again, I'm not really a horror like aficionado, but it's odd to me that it took this long for somebody to do a movie like this. Obviously, you have those tongue-in-cheeks tongue-in-cheek sort of satires or parodies like Scream and everything like that in the 90s and the aughts. But something to really make an all-encompassing horror send-up. It was odd that it took this long for somebody to think of that, but I think it was in the right hands with Drew Goddard and Joss Whedon. I think they had the right idea, because it seems like a proper send-up. It seems like a loving send-up rather than something that's making fun, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I gotta say, because you were talking about Whedon and all the accusations against him, or all the it's accusations, I guess, pointed at him, is you can see, and you hate to put it this way, but it's it goes to show you how he gets away with it, because he's actually really clever. And that's what I looked at with this particular film. Was I was really astounded by just how clever it was. I was like, wow, this is an awesome idea. Definitely a much more sophisticated idea than it represents itself as being, which I think is, again, part of that multi-layer meta of the movie. And I was like, why didn't anyone ever think of this? Or like, what? And my mind really operated in this mode of, how many different things can you do with this? Has this ever been done before? This is so awesome. Like, bringing in, I love the intro sequence where it shows like the human sacrifices and stuff from like the Aztecs. And I love that, because it just shows that these things all tie into this placation of this underworld that would get way crazier if not for this placation that we look at as this barbaric stuff, and we still do it in this most organized way. And so I just really dig that idea a lot. And I love the idea especially of there just being a bunch of different things that can go wrong and they're all real. What did you make of the kind of goofiness of the Foundation itself? I thought, now I'm a big fan of The West Wing, as everyone knows. And I thought Bradley Whitford, I love Bradley Whitford. He plays basically the same character and everything. And he's awesome, as I've said, because he's come up in the past. He's obviously awesome in The West Wing, and he's awesome in Handmaid's Tale. Plays a very harrowing character in that. But it's always good to see him pop up. And he plays very much the Josh Lyman character from West Wing in this, where he's just very fun and snappy. They even have a few walk and talk moments, which I wondered if what was a direct nod to that. I think it probably was. There are a couple times in the Foundation where he's walking with someone and talking, and that is totally what The West Wing was. You don't see that really anywhere else. So I think that was kind of a nod to that character as well, since that's an iconic character in TV history, in my opinion. So it's cool to see him, but there's like this zaniness to the way that they present it. What did you think about that? Because they made a foundational, pardon the pun, because we're talking about the Foundation, but a foundational decision to make it funny. And there's another direction where this didn't have to be funny. And what I was thinking about in terms of this was The Last of Us. Now I'm going to spoil The Last of Us, the first one, a little bit here. So tune out for 30 seconds if you'd like. Give you a moment. But at the end of The Last of Us, Joel makes a really selfish decision that could potentially cost humanity everything. And similar decisions made at the end of this movie. So you could have played it totally straight, and I think actually gotten something different out of it. So I'm wondering what you thought about making it comedic, as opposed to like treating the Foundation like a very serious thing, which I think is another option that would have made for an interesting film. So, I mean, it is serious, but like if it was taken seriously, like they're taking bets and they're fucking around and it's a joke. And I wonder, that decision makes it a comedy, but it didn't have to be that way, I don't think, to make the movie good. I'm wondering what you thought about that whole thing and the decision to do that.
Yeah, that treatment was a lot of fun. I mean, I think it does start with the Hadley and Citizens characters of Bradley Whitford and Richard Jenkins. Those two are awesome together. I'm not sure I know either their catalogs deeply enough to know this, but like their chemistry on screen together is awesome. Like it really worked as like a mentor and protege. It really worked as two office workers that could have worked in a sprawling, warehouse-like laboratory complex anywhere doing anything. But their job was like this blood sacrifice, orchestrating this blood ritual, this appeasement of the ancient gods. So I love that they're typical office workers. They're having, crappy coffee in the break room. They're commiserating. They're kind of bitching about their lives. They're joking around. They have this fantasy betting pool going on. There's water cooler talk. They're berating their inferiors and their underlings. But it was like, in the context, it seemed like the office workers you and I would, associate with daily. But what they're doing and their role and the backstory behind it's hilarious. It's like this thing that they're doing with great gravity, this all important thing that actually keeps the earth in one piece, keeps humanity alive, but they're just office workers. And those two were perfectly cast for that. And I love going back and forth between the misadventures of the kids and the dingy, dark cabin and, that sterile, sprawling, white office environment, overlit and everything like that. Such a neat thing. And actually, I was thinking about this. This is the one thing I lamented with doing the episode because it has been so long now. And even though I never really had my ears pricked to the specifics of the movie, you just hear things over the course of a decade. So I wondered how many things got watered down because I've heard about things or I've had things inadvertently spoiled or I was accidentally in earshot of hearing things. So my experience might have got a little diluted rather than if I went to the movie theater in 2012 and sat down to see this with audiences on opening weekend. I would have loved that. This is one movie that I could think of off the top of my head that I would have really loved to have been surprised. There were still plenty of surprises, but I do wonder how much, I got a little less, there was a little less energy there of, seeing it for the first time because I knew of this, I knew of that. And, but I love it. I think it's brilliantly handled. Yeah. The acting is great. There's not really that many characters to contend with. And I think if you watched it really with a fresh set of eyes and went in, I think there's plenty of surprises. Like I kind of half knew where it was going, but I could definitely see audiences not knowing what the hell this was. I even watched the trailers to see what audiences were going in with, what kind of information they were going into the theater with back in 2012. And I think now I told Helene and Lilia this, they think I'm crazy. I think this movie would have benefited from not having any trailers. I don't know if that's ever been done. That's my little dig and proud moment brainstorm. I'm sure it's been done in the past, but to have a movie that says, look, we're not going to show you anything. Maybe a poster, an image. Here's the director of photography, the director, the cast or whatever. Here's the image. Go in and see the movie and really be surprised. Maybe there's a log line, but that's it. This movie could have really benefited from that because I think going in, even think of how it starts with the typical horror opening with the running blood, and then it cuts right to the underground facility with these two goofy office workers having their banter about childproofing furniture. And it's a wild ride. It's really a roller coaster ride because you're like, what is this? I don't know if you're trying to identify. Is this funny? Is it serious? Is it horror? Is it drama? I don't know what's going on. So I love that they kind of lead you along and you don't really have firm footing on what you're getting into. And so I think it is a movie that could really benefit from really going in unspoiled, and I think just being on the planet and being, kind of rubbing elbows with nerd culture over the last 10 years fouled it up a little bit for me.
That's so funny, Dave, because it really did. I didn't know anything about it. I just really didn't. I somehow just avoided anything. There was literally.
So you had that experience.
Yeah, I didn't know anything about it. When I tell you that I just went in thinking it was a real slasher movie, I did. I just thought I knew that it was revered for some reason, but I just thought it was because it was good. Yeah. And for some reason, I in my mind, I guess in my mind's eye, I saw it as that one of those films that was like the horror turnaround. That actually happened a few years later with Resident Evil 7 and a few other games in gaming where horror just came into a new renaissance. And horror is obviously there with film right now between like Get Out and Nope and all these movies. Then you have all the Ari Aster stuff, and it's like, oh my goodness, so I thought that maybe this movie was just a beginning of that, a certain first gust. But so yeah, I really did go in blind. That's why I was like, Mike and I were working. I had no idea that this was the movie at all, and
trying to figure it out. Right
now, what do you think about this idea? Do you think they could have played this movie straight? Do you think that this movie could have been done without being funny?
Definitely. I think that could have been a whole nother flavor. And you know what? I feel almost bad weighing in on it because not being a super huge horror buff, I'm much more of a film guy than a horror guy. But, that might exist, whether it's a B movie or whether it's something more popular and just went under my radar. But I could definitely see playing this straight, and I could see making it quite scary as well. I could see, but this is more of a thing of saying like, taking all of the horror that we know, whether it's Scooby-Doo or the slasher movies, exploitation, the masked killers, all the stuff we always talk about, The Shining, The Exorcist, Friday, Nightmare, everything, Halloween, everything, and saying like, these are the reasons, this is why it is the way it is. This is why the blonde slut is always killed first. And this is why the kids are always having sex in the woods when it seems like an inopportune moment when they should be hiding or splitting up instead of teaming up, and all these things. It explains all the things that bother us, all of the things that always seem to be integrated into horror, and saying, no, these are the reasons for it. I love that. I would have definitely chosen the dark comedic style rather than the really deeply horrific style. But who knows? Maybe that's another option to take something like this anyway and say, let's make it something that's really dark,
Well, I was going to say, because it reminds me a little bit of Interstellar, which is a movie we've done, even though it's not within the parameter. Actually, it is almost old enough to have really been included, but we did it already because I love that movie so much. And it reminds me, for some reason, of the version of NASA in that movie where you discover that there's just this huge entity that for many, many, many years has been trying to work on this huge problem that you didn't even know existed. And how it's like you can laugh almost because you want to cry finding that out. That could be maybe the laughter from it. But it was just, I just thought of it because I was like, it was well served to be a comedy. I liked it. I thought it was funny, but I just couldn't help but think, what if you tried to present this idea where throughout time, people have had to placate, like hidden knowledge has been passed on in some way to placate this ancient threat where you have to figure out human sacrifices. And not only that, but the way they used to do it then is not the way we do it now. We do it in such a sophisticated way that we could just pull them all and kill them.
Right.
But they say in particular, like they have to make the choice. They have to choose for themselves. And they have all these other things going on around the world, which makes it even fucking crazier. The Japanese schoolgirls.
Love that.
And they like
shit.
bind the Japanese schoolgirls. The Japanese schoolgirls bind the spirit into like a frog. It's like so funny. So that shit is definitely hysterical. But it's interesting that it's all predicated on this idea that we can't, and I don't know if they go into this, and I don't know if this is the intent, but it reads to me that they're saying we can't force this because society doesn't allow for that anymore. In other words, we're not in the human sacrifice realm where we can be like, here's the slut, here's the fool, here's the thing. We'll kill you first, we'll kill you second, we'll kill you third, and placate. And doesn't matter what happens to the virgin, kind of thing. And my vibe, and maybe I'm misinterpreting it because I only saw it once, was them saying no, because he says like, no, they have to choose. And once they choose to open the treasure chest or look into the conch or whatever, I love that when he's like, it was in his hand. Yeah.
The merman.
The merman stuff. And when you think about that, I dug that. Did you get the same vibe? Is that do you think my interpretation is accurate that there's simply a modern idea of saying like, we're going to do this, but they have to do it to themselves. We're not going to actually do it to them.
There's got to be some level of autonomy.
And I dig that, by the way. I think that's like really clever and cool because they worked it within the parameters of humanity, like, modern expectations where it's like, you're going to die and you're going to do it by sacrifice, but we're not going to drag you to the top of the pyramid like the Aztecs did.
Right.
We're going to put you in this fucking crazy ass situation instead.
We'll lead you, but you have to follow.
Right. So do you think that was like, do you think that that's intentional or do you think that that's the rule? I think how I took it now, Helene, watching this with Helene was an interesting experience again for me because she's a big stickler. She doesn't miss a beat. She's very investigative in terms of details, and she doesn't really like to suspend her disbelief. Like that bothers her. She comes from I'm down for more whimsy, and that probably comes from being a comic book guy and being an animation guy. And her sensibilities are much more grounded. So it's interesting watching things with her because I'll realize there's a lot of things I'm missing just because I'm so willing to suspend my disbelief and just have fun oftentimes, But my read on that was this whole thing is this event that's orchestrated to appease these ancient gods. And it's a blood sacrifice. But my whole thing with giving an element of autonomy to the victims was that it's a game.
and that it's entertainment. So if you're kind of force feeding every beat of this thing, it's not fun. So that there's that element. It's like watching sports, right? It's like, we know it's going to play out. We know the broad parameters of how things are going to play out, but we don't know the finer points. That's up to them. That's up to the players. That's up to the participants. So we could lead them to the basement, but we don't know what they're going to pick. So it's always fresh. It's entertaining. There's that element of surprise and that element of like, what are they going to pick this time? That makes it a proper sort of entertaining thing for the gods, the mean-spirited ancient gods, which is obviously us, the audience, or horror film buffs, or whatever you want to say. That we have to see the boobs, we have to see these kids die horrifically, but how is it going to happen this time? That's the game, that's the sport of it. So that's how I read it, but I don't think they over-explain that. I think they kind of, again, like we're like the five kids, in the Scooby van, we're kind of being led a little bit too, but we're not being pushed into certain corners. We have our autonomy too of how to sort of interpret things. And I think that's really, I think that's what makes the movie so much fun, that they don't spoon feed you the whole thing. Like I would love to see more, like, all right, we have this global effort to appease these gods. Every country has their means of participating, and they're responsible for holding up their end. But it always comes down to the United States and Japan. It would have been really cool to throw Italy a nod there. Like, oh, Italy used to be on top in the 60s, with Dario Argento and everything like that, but they kind of fell off, but Japan and United States are always kind of the last men standing, but here comes South Korea, because all the which would have happened sooner than 2012. So they couldn't quite do that. But you know what I mean? I love that kind of fun element of like, oh, Sweden, fuck them, Turkey. Like those guys are deadbeats. Like it's going to be up to us again to save the planet. And, so there's a lot that's left to the imagination, because we never really see the other countries contending. They failed. We see on the screen they failed. And they said they showed, I don't know if this was in a director's cut or something, but they show some of those details of the failed screens where it's like you could see Dracula's castle or something like that, but he got the upper hand, that type of thing, which is really, it's a lot of fun. There's a lot you could do there. Yeah.
So maybe I'm misinterpreting it in the sense that like, yeah, it kind of has to happen in some sort of organic way. Because I was just trying to bind it to the human sacrifice imagery, because that was obviously not done in any certain way. So I guess I was just wondering, could a more totalitarian humanity just take 5 people and just be like, you're dead now?
Yeah.
Right. That's the way it seems to me that was the way it used to be done. So I like the extra sadistic nature of saying like, we're going to make this into a game and it's going to get really crazy. And you know what? It was reminding me a lot of just a couple other pieces of fiction. This reminded me a little bit of that old story, The Lottery. You remember that? Where,
oh, of course. Shirley Jackson. Yeah.
Okay, Shirley Jackson. Exactly. And then it also reminds me of just the Hunger Games a little bit, where it's combat and it's for entertainment and it's all fucked up because it's kids fighting each other for no reason and there's one winner. I love that story. I love how dark young adult books can get and how we're just like, yeah, that's fine.
It's very similar to Hunger Games. Helene brought that up, which I don't know if I would have thought that before you said it and she said it, but it is. It's very, it has that totalitarian sort of oppressive government, mean-spirited games for the entertainment of the upper crust, and very that society with a very hierarchical order. I
love that. I love that universe.
It's so good.
It's so cool.
It's good shit, man.
And then it reminds me of Squid Game as well, which is more recent. Did you see Squid Game?
I only watched the first 2 episodes of that. I'm not through that yet. Oh my
God. I loved it. I thought it was so good. I was like, this is so amazing. I especially love the Kojima like bad guys in it. Have you seen them yet? Those dudes?
I haven't. I got a little spoiled, but I'm only through the first 2. You know what? I got to go back. That's going to be my next thing. That kind of fell off my radar.
That's good. They're doing a sequel, so it would be worth getting back into.
I would imagine they would bring.
Yeah, they figured out. They're going to figure that out, I'm sure. So it reminded me of those 2 things, and then in some way, I love the idea of putting these consequential choices that go way beyond any reason into the hands of humanity and them making the wrong choice. Cabin in the Woods is frustrating in a way because they make the wrong choice. I know it's a horrible thing, but you would think that they would do the right thing. So that was a frustrating thing to me. But what did you think about the various players? We do have the 5, the whore, the fool, the scholar, the athlete, and the virgin as we went through. And I kept wondering, Kristen Connolly, where the fuck do I know her from? And it was bothering me, and it bothered me and bothered me. And then I looked finally. She's in House of Cards. That's where I knew her from. Oh. She plays the like girlfriend of the gubernatorial candidate from Pennsylvania. I mean, it's a random thing, but she's a somewhat main character for a couple seasons. So that's where I knew her from. And that was a little bit after this, I think, but especially because this was filmed in 2009. So this was definitely after this. But what did you think about the various players? It was interesting, especially I thought, to see Jesse Williams, the scholar, who is very famous in PlayStation circles now because he was one of the main characters in Detroit Become Human, the Quantic Dream game. So seeing him, I was like, oh my God, there's, the fucking robot or whatever from Detroit Become Human. But what did you think about the various players and their performances?
Yeah, I didn't even realize he was in that until I read it. So he's iconic in those circles as well. I think, this is a very likable cast of 5. It was interesting that we talked about this a little bit with Texas Chainsaw, but I got that Scooby-Doo vibe again. The 5 kids in the van going out to have fun. They're not solving mysteries like the Scooby Gang, but they're going out for a good time. And it kind of starts like a teen comedy. They have their witty banter. They're in their little dorms, their apartments, their college town, and they're excited about getting some time off the grid, drinking a keg of beer, smoking a little pot, little sex, whatever. You got the fifth wheel in there. It felt like very formulaic, almost like teen comedy rom-com type thing, which a lot of horror movies start out with that vibe. So it kind of felt familiar. But what's interesting there's 2 interesting things I found out, I discovered with this cast. I think all the players are great. I think they do this thing where you have the 5 types, right? You have the fool, you have the virgin, the whore, the scholar, and the athlete. But within the first 20 minutes, 25 minutes of the film, you find out that they're not so stereotypical of types, right? You have the burnout character, but he seems to have a modicum of wisdom. He's not just the Shaggy, you know what I mean? He's not just the Sean Penn from Fast Times.
He's got he has the best line, which is bind them with ancient logics, which is I love that line. So I wrote that one down.
Right, and you have the good girl, the virgin character, but we already know she's not a virgin. She's she was having an affair with her professor, right? So there's a little gray with the character. The slutty character is a pre-med major, so we know she has a head on her shoulders, and the quote unquote athlete, the Hemsworth character, we know he's super smart. He does his Goodwill Hunting spiel in the beginning with the books, if you want to impress your professor, read this book, he won't know this. So they're giving us different dimensions to the characters, even though they're supposed to fulfill these archetypes, which I think is interesting. And then of course, the other kid who's supposed to be the scholar is an athlete. The Holden character is coming over. He's all state and he's coming over to play. He's coming from whatever they said. He's coming from county or community college to play for state or whatever. So everybody's got an added dimension to them. And then I found them all very charismatic too, especially the Jules character, the Kurt character, and the Marty character. Those 3 especially. I think Dana and Holden are fine too. But those 3 characters are so charismatic that you kind of worry for them. They don't seem just machete fodder, in a Friday the 13th, where you're okay, the Kevin Bacon character is kind of dead. There's going to be so much blood on Michael Myers' hatchet. You kind of really cared about them. And then when the movie went into that territory of them having to start to go through this ordeal, specifically when Kurt and Jules lay down outside to have sex, and that knife goes through Jules's hand, you're oh shit, this is going to get brutal. From that instant that these kids are going to get fucked no matter how much you like them. Exactly what the tone is from that moment. There's not going to be anything precious. You're going to see these kids go through it. And I thought, and by that time too, interestingly, you're getting that dark comedy flavor. You're getting some laughs. you're getting you're kind of full of the Hadley and Citizen characters. So you're having a good time. But then all of a sudden you also realize, oh no, shit's going to get dark. And the movie's going to go off in that direction. And they're not going to be so precious with our heroes. And I thought that was really interesting because I wasn't sure how they were going to handle that. You know, you got the comedy elements and we know it's kind of dark and it's tongue in cheek, but are they going to show us the gore? Is it going to get brutal for these characters? And it does.
Yeah, it is funny how in the middle of the film it takes a kind of sharp turn, and in a lot of different ways. It gets much more into the mythos of the movie as well. What did you think about the basement in the cabin with all of the different ways that they could succumb to, I guess, evil horrors? There's all these things they're mystified by. Plus, they're being gassed and poisoned in all these different ways to kind of push them in a certain direction. What do you make of that idea? I love him playing with that orb thing, and then you see that random, like, I don't know, it's a pirate character or something holding it later on, and I guess that somehow would invoke him. But what did you think about that idea that they kind of had to make a selection out of all these different options that ended up being these real horrors?
Dude, it's so fun. I mean, you have to have the basement. First of all, the creepy basement. The basement is one of the scariest things, right? Think of like Dawn of the Dead or something. Like the basement, like that's one of the most horrifying notions. What other horrifying basement stuff was there in horror films of old? I'm not even sure, but off the top of my head. But I love to have all the tropes in there, and the fact that you have to get the kids into the basement, but they have to select of their own accord the one icon, the one object that's going to evoke whatever specific evil. So of course they choose the zombie redneck torture family or whatever. But yeah, you have the merman in there, you have the porcelain dolls, you have the Hellraiser type orb, you have the carnival games that I guess would evoke the evil clown and the evil circus. So it's so much, it's so much fun. It's all specific, just like the creatures that we see later. All of those things are sending up, all those objects, all of those icons are sending up, those props are sending up some sort of, famous horror, content of some kind. So it's so much fun. And I love that too. Not only that that's where they have to step in, the teens, the victims have to step in and choose of their own volition, but also that kind of ties in to all of the office workers and all of the people behind this being able to have that office bet, you know what I mean? Which is so much fun. Here's one thing I don't even know if I missed this in watching it or if they kind of go into this territory at any point, but these people that work in this sprawling underground lab facility where all of this stuff is done and all of this stuff is orchestrated, do they live down there too? Because at one point, I think it's the Hadley character says to the gas station attendant, he says, how's the weather up there? So I wasn't that's the Harbinger character. So I wasn't sure if they're always down there and they kind of live their whole lives down there. Cause they were saying, right, the younger female scientist was saying, she was alluding to the fact that it gets pretty heavy and, it kind of gets to be a drag. And the one thing with the interoffice betting is one thing, they're trying to stay lighthearted about things. And so I wasn't sure if that was like their whole life down there, or do they get to come out, they work a 9 to 5 and then they get to surface again. I'm not sure. Or
are they there for like periods of time and then they leave, something like that. Right. Yeah, it is interesting. I think that by taking the comedic route, which they did, that you're kind of forced to suspend disbelief where these questions don't really matter. I think if they took the serious route that I was suggesting was a possibility, then they'd have to kind of explain some of the stuff away. Because I was thinking specifically about that as well in terms of what do they tell people on the outside? How does this not get out? This is a pretty big secret. There are a lot of people working on this, and it seems like it's going on all over the world. So what's going on here? But because they take the comedic route, they kind of disarm you from ever having the proclivity to ask that question because it's not really that important. But it is relevant, and that's the serious take would have required an answer to that, which is interesting.
Yeah, I wonder. Or if there's any like side fiction, like is there a comic book? Because he's talking about childproofing his house and he's having his first kid, but is that some apartment underground there?
Yeah.
They're always at DEF CON 5, so like they always have to be on duty type of thing. Or do they get to go home and then there's a night shift? It's interesting.
What do you think about the Truman Show type reality of living under cameras like that and being constantly followed and all of that? Does that make you uncomfortable thinking about that? I often think about that. I even wish I had just had a sticker over my phone on the camera on my phone, you know? I don't like having all these active microphones and all of these active cameras everywhere that are certainly listening to you and watching you. And I don't know, it creeps me out. What do you think about that aspect of this movie?
Yeah, I think we've even gotten so much closer to actually living like that, even since 2012, right? There's cameras in our cars. There's cameras on our front porches. Every store we go to, every school, our phones, our computers. Like, yeah, like we kind of do live like that. You know, I like the Marty character finding it too. Like he finds the wires in the wall and he gets to, you know, he gets kind of hip to what's going on, or at least half hip before he gets yanked out of the window. But yeah, it's kind of creepy. And it does recall things like Truman Show and, you know, constantly living under surveillance, even when you're not aware of it. And yeah, it is interesting. There's a lot to think about there with, and that, you know, having that whole environment set up from the covered bridge or that, you know, that bridge in the mountain, that tunnel in the mountain onward, like that whole part of the world exists just to play out this, you know, this escapade, this event, so the gods could be appeased. It's really interesting.
Let's talk about some of the imagery in the movie, which is pretty good, I think. First of all, the gas station in the beginning, is that just a direct call out to Texas Chainsaw, you think? I mean, or are we just seeing that because it's a recency bias?
Yeah, it always seems like, you know, it reminds me of our first road trip down south to skate, like in the mid 90s, of what we thought like the South, like south of Tennessee was going to be like. It wasn't anything like that, you know, but it's what it always kind of plays out in this fantasy of like, we're from the Northeast, you know, everything's kind of civilized and populated. And then you're going to go down to these rural pockets where there's not a lot of people. It's more primitive. Maybe they have a little less technology, a little less stuff. There's these wide swaths of land where there's a store every 20 miles, not every 20 feet. But it does seem like a typical horror thing, like that whole setting off the tone of being a stranger in a strange land. You know, we talked about that with Texas Chainsaw, like, you know, and being isolated and being removed from any semblance of help or hope. You know, you're truly out there with the elements to contend with whatever you meet along the way. And, you know, it's up to you and your small band of burnouts or whatever, you know? So that's kind of, and it does call, it's a horror trope. You know what I mean? You're going back and it's the harbinger, like the first person you meet that sets off something eerie. It's foreshadowing of what's to come. That one character of like, don't go any further. And it, you know, it dates all the way back to Dracula. We read that novel for KnockBack, actually. Right. You know, going to the town outside the castle grounds and being like, don't go any further. You know, only bad will come or, you know, befall you if you continue on this way, like stay in town, that type of thing. Enter of your own free will. There you go. Yeah. And plus the harbinger character, that guy is amazing. That guy is fantastic with his chewing tobacco. Yeah. He's kind of wall-eyed. Yeah, it's good. It's really good. It's good shit. Another image I love is just that zombie character with the bear trap, Morningstar chain thing, whip. It's so cool. I always just love, we were talking about this when we were doing Texas Chainsaw, which was just the introduction of weapons, just the arsenals of weapons and how everything can become a weapon. And bear traps actually remind me a great deal of Resident Evil 4. But you think about it, it's like, I've never seen anyone put a bear trap at the end of a chain and then throw it at people and use it as some sort of whip. So that was a kind of a cool implement. I liked some of the violence in the movie. What did you think about some of the more violent imagery? I thought it was somewhat staid. I didn't think the movie was very scary or gory from any perspective. And no, it could have went much further. Yeah, so I was a little bit surprised by that. I don't need that or want that. I don't care. But what did you think about all of that more violent imagery? Yeah, I think, it called up like those awesome kung fu movies of the 70s with the crazy weapons. Like every movie you see, there'd be some other dynamic. Yeah, like a comma or something on the end of a chain. Then they want to you put it on the end of a pole. Now you got a brand new weapon. Yeah, the bear trap on the chain was was pretty inventive. I think the whole mutant zombie torture family thing was a pretty inventive trope, actually, because you're taking zombies and making it into this group of zombies, but then besides just going after brains, they're fighting with weapons. So it's taking a bunch of different tropes and putting them together, mashing them together, and forming this new thing that I thought was pretty inventive and fun. And there's more of them because you have a whole family to contend with, so that's kind of cool. So I thought that was cool. But I like you, Kyle. I agree. Like, I thought we were going to see some... Now, Jules, spoilers out there, right? Jules loses her head, and that gets pretty graphic because we actually see the dismembered head and everything.
Yeah, they throw it at her, yeah.
But there wasn't a lot of, like, limbs getting cut off. So I thought it was really going to go in that direction. Once we see that initial brutality, I really thought that it was going to go off. And I thought that it was only going to keep going in that direction and get worse and worse. But it really didn't. I thought it was pretty restrained. And yeah, I was surprised about that because I thought the movie was definitely making a comment early on once the violence starts that it's going to get pretty rough for the group.
The one thing I thought
it stays pretty tame.
The one thing I thought was pretty like scary movie, like the series Scary Movie-ish, like comedic, was the bong stuff with all the fighting with the bong, and the bong kind of saves the day and all that, and the stoner kind of being the savior. That was a little goofy. I felt like the stoner character is actually a little annoying at times, even though he had some cool lines. But generally speaking, I enjoyed the balance in the movie of storytelling and kind of advancing the plot, giving us a little bit of background and character development and all the rest. It didn't overstay its welcome. I think I don't know that I have any complaints. I thought the movie was really great, but I guess a critique, what I would just say is maybe you could have given us less. I know that sounds weird, but you almost answer too many questions. It almost gets too deep into the situation as opposed to just letting the audience think it. Yeah. And I think that would have been a more interesting thing to maybe even explore in another film or a prequel or something of some sort.
It gives you a lot. It definitely does. I mean, the Marty character struck me. I was like, wow, this is a proper live action Shaggy at first. The voice and sort of his posture. Now, the interesting thing about Marty is he's smarter than Shaggy. He's not so stoned that he's only thinking of food the whole time, although food does play a part with the Pop-Tarts and stuff. But you know what was also cool about the stoner character? And again, sort of oddly defying stereotype, although this is a movie all about stereotypes and cliches, is that he stands up for his friend at the gas station and he gets mouthy with that dude. And he shows courage. You know what I mean? He's like, you were rude to my friend. And then, he even his parting shot, he calls the guy an asshole. That's not very Shaggy-like. And that's not very Stoner-like, Spicoli-like.
Yeah, Spicoli wouldn't do that. Where'd you get that jacket?
I thought that was, yeah. Where'd you get that jacket? I got this from the station. Yeah, so I thought that was kind of cool that they took that little effort. And I'm still kind of wondering why they did that, but I thought that was definitely interesting. That they took the stereotypes and stood them on their head a little bit. Shout out to Matthew Lillard. He's the other live action Shaggy. But I thought Marty, who is that? Frank Kranz that played Marty. He did it was like, wow, this is a live action interpretation of straight up Shaggy. Is Chris Hemsworth. Fred, maybe minus the ascot, pretty handsome. I mean, Chris Hemsworth, the Kurt character, calls himself a gorgeous man in the movie. I like that the movie is very there's a lot of self-realization in the movie. It tells it like it is.
Yeah, it's one of those,
which I think is interesting.
It's one of those, it was one of his first films, actually, Chris Hemsworth, which is interesting. He got
Thor. He didn't have Thor by the time they got this movie in the can in 2009, he still wasn't Thor. He wasn't
right. And he was Kirk as well, but in Star Trek, but even then he was filming this before Star Trek hit. So it wasn't, I always like looking at it through that lens of like who you're actually getting, not the order in which it came out, but the actual filming order and all of the rest. So it puts him before because Thor's 2011. So this came out in 2012, which was probably one of the big reasons they wanted to get this movie out in the post MGM era with Lionsgate was maybe we can make a little money on this guy. They were right. They did make a little bit of money. But I like looking at it through that lens because that's really, he did this movie before he was really anyone.
What do you think of Hemsworth? Now, obviously super handsome. I like his style. I think he has an affability that shines through, right? But do you think, in the order of really great actors, for you, is he a great actor?
I don't know enough about him because Mike and I were discussing that. I'm like, honestly, I think other than Red Dawn, with the remake, I don't think I've ever seen him in anything because I've never seen any of the Thor movies. And when I'm looking at his filmography right now, it's like, yeah, I saw Red Dawn, and then there's just a bunch of Thor stuff, and I didn't see any of this stuff. So I really don't think I'm really appropriately equipped to have an opinion on this guy one way or the other. I know he's very popular, but I just don't know. I didn't see Star Trek. I don't know any of these films, so I don't know. That's the answer.
I haven't seen the Abrams Star Treks either.
I have no.
Although they look good, really, I think they look good.
But yeah, I don't know.
I don't know. I'm curious. I wonder. It'll be interesting to see if I could get through those movies.
Dude, I was so happy when they renewed Picard for a third season just so they can make fun of it on Red Letter Media because those are so funny. Those reviews they're so miserable in those reviews and they're just so good. I love those guys. So
I think Rich really likes it, doesn't he?
Rich likes it, yeah. But yeah.
The other two.
You're right. Yeah, Rich likes everything, it seems like. So one of the things that I wanted to finish on was I promised we would get back to Joss Whedon. I mean, where do you leave it with him? It seems like I don't know this for sure. See, I don't presume to know enough about film and TV and production. I'm just looking at something here about it. Is he really done? Because it seems like his work is wrapped up. If you look at his filmography, he doesn't have anything new on it, I don't think, except for things he's been removed from already. Like that Nevers, that show, The Nevers.
Right, so that's right.
How do you understand like what's going on with him? Is he just persona non grata now?
They thought, I've heard banter, I've heard talk, and I'm not a super MCU guy, although I enjoy the movies. I'm not even fully up to date yet, but people have pointed out the fact that he was yanked from the MCU after doing the first two Avengers films. And that was very telling because those two movies were people considered good and were very successful. Now, when Civil War and onward were also very good and very successful. People have also pointed out that, he started as somebody who was a script doctor and maybe was credited, maybe was uncredited, maybe worked behind the scenes and is still doing that in an uncredited way, which I find very interesting. But I could see, I sat down, I really wanted to understand this, knowing more of Joss Whedon's legend than, again, his work, not ever seeing really an episode of Buffy, not seeing Angel, still haven't seen Firefly, have seen the two Avengers movies, have not really seen a big cross section of stuff in order to judge him professionally. I really know more of his reputation as one of these guys who is a very sought after writer. Again, I compare him to Dan Harmon in that regards of somebody who is known for being very clever, witty, a very specific style, a very marketable style, and somebody who's seemingly very talented at that, right? A visionary, a proper visionary, an auteur. But the Kevin Smith rant, for instance, was directly related to a story, which I don't know every detail of Joss Whedon calling a meeting with his group of writers, which I guess I'm assuming was on Buffy, but it could have been something else. And apparently it was a female writer. And basically he called a meet. He had a problem with the vehicle or the episode that this person wrote. And instead of calling a private meeting with just this one person, he called a meeting with this one person and all the other writers and proceeded to browbeat this person for the better part of an hour in front of everybody, to the point of making this person cry twice within this meeting. And that's what Kevin Smith was saying. I can't even abide this. This makes me so angry to hear somebody would treat somebody like this. And then I've heard of two instances where he got physical, once with an actor, or maybe twice, once with a male actor and once with a female actor, where he got physically angry with somebody. One case was somebody questioning his notes or trying to give him notes. And the other one was of an actor that he was trying to kill off of the Angel series became popular with the audience and basically was telling the actor, like put him up against the wall and grab his throat and be like, I'm going to somehow find a way to get you off the show, even though the network and the fans want you on. Not in a joking way, but in a very, sociopathic way. And then I went on to read stories of like specifically some of the Buffy cast coming out, and then that sort of dominoing one after the other of being like, he was a bully, he was mean-spirited. He, when one actress got pregnant, he asked her if you're getting too fat, are you going to keep the baby? Like, just behavior that went above and beyond like difficult. Like, it crossed over into mean-spiritedness, it sounds like. And I could say, Kyle, I watched, there's not a lot for somebody as popular as Joss Whedon. There's not a lot out there, but I saw him do some interviews, and he seems like he seems like an unpleasant character. Like, there's no likability shining through, and there's very little humility. And I'm not saying it's a mandate that you have to be humble. I'm not saying that, but there's something there. He has a very defensive posture, even in an interview where he's there to celebrate his work and his projects. I saw him sit down. He got invited to Oxford, the Oxford Union, and he's sitting down at Oxford doing this interview, and he was rude to the moderator and the audience. And, it was like, it just seems like I could see all the conjecturing, whatever you hear, we're outside of Hollywood. We're looking at from the outside in, we're fans. So I don't know what's real and what's not, but I can see it just in looking at, taking a cross section of his behavior with whatever public videos are available and what's been said from reliable sources. There's a Vulture article where I didn't get a chance to read it, but it's supposedly very telling. And he is supposedly very forthright in the article about, I did this. And to an almost unapologetic degree, but at least, I haven't read it yet again, but owning some of these things, specific instances actually of this behavior. But, again, I do wonder, like, I haven't seen any, there might've been actually some sexual harassment as part of this Me Too, mea culpa with him specifically, but there might've been at least one or two things that I heard about that. But I do wonder, like, I don't want to say a statute of limitations, but is there a cooling down period, right? Where he will become integrated back into the fold of, if not Hollywood, then just entertainment, in some regard. I wonder about things like this with, Weinstein. Guys like Weinstein are done. And he was in poor health anyway. But I do want, there's a lot of cases. I think about John Lasseter, Pixar's John Lasseter. Is he going to be allowed to come back in a camera facing way where he could be the face of the productions? He's working at Skydance or wherever he is, but is he going to be a front man again? I don't know. I think about that with guys like Joss Whedon. And isn't it tragic? Because you hear about him and he grew up as a nerd and he grew up being bullied and he had such a hard time growing up and he never got any girls and all these things. To grow up and have the money and to have the stature and the power and be a sought after creative in Hollywood and stuff like that too. It's so tragic that he couldn't just embrace that and enjoy the perks of being all of those things, being wealthy and being successful and having a family and all these things. So it's one of those guys who seems like he's, he's kind of shooting himself in the foot. It almost reads like, and I got tired of actually going down the rabbit hole this week, but it really did. Again, it did start with me almost pumping the brakes on doing the episode because I thought it was like the behavior was so outrageous, starting with that Kevin Smith reaction, which you never see him doing that. So I think it's interesting. I think it's going to be interesting to see the way it plays out. And, I do wonder too, like, I wonder two things. I wonder, can a really, truly shitty person, if that's Joss Whedon or somebody else, if Joss Whedon fits into this category realistically, which I guess he does, can they reform? And can they apologize in a wholehearted manner? You know what I mean? Can they apologize, and mean it, right? Can they apologize and mean it and be allowed to return to that space and then demonstrate that they're going to bring a whole different look, a whole different persona, way of treating people into that thing and be forgiven? It seems like these guys, I don't know if Joss Whedon got to the point, is he even hungry enough anymore to apologize? Like, he's a millionaire many times over, right? You would think they would want to do it just to be a good person, but you think about why do we never see that? Why do we never see the heartfelt apology, the sincerity, a sincere apology, and a return to grace, and being given a second chance, and then proving that you could make that change. You know what I mean? And you could be a force for good and be someone who's actually pleasant to work with, and maybe show you a little humility, maybe help coach and usher in and serve as a mentor to the younger people coming up. And, rather than being this power hungry, it's my way or the highway, pouting, stamping your foot, brat that it seemed like Joss Whedon was, and being hurtful. You know what I mean? And
yeah,
it's interesting.
I think he probably is still working, because we brought up earlier, he's a script doctor, so he's not going to get credited for that shit anyway. And that stuff always comes out later. So we might find out that he was doing that for this time period that he's been silent, this 5 years or so that he's not seemed to have been working. But I think the reason you don't see that very often is because people are prideful. I also think that it's probably difficult when you're in a situation where people are saying a lot of things about you, and probably a lot of the stuff is mischaracterized or not true. And you're kind of expected to just accept all of it. And that's a difficult thing, probably. I think there's probably some piece to that as well. And because there was things coming out with his wife was writing about him, about how he was cheating on him. And I was like, cheating on her. And I'm like, listen, dude, that sucks, but I really don't care that your husband's cheating on you. That's completely irrelevant to me. It doesn't mean anything to what we're talking about, so this stuff kind of muddies the water. I was like, that's a domestic dispute for you to deal with. I don't know that I really care about him cheating on you. I care about him mistreating people in his life, including you, his wife, but that's kind of a personal problem. And I don't want people to be going into our lives or anyone else's lives, dissecting them, and are thinking they have the kind of parasocial right to dissect them like that. So I think there's probably some perspective to that. And then on his side, I think he probably looks at it, although he's right in one way, but he's completely wrong in his behavior, is he probably looks around and he says, listen, I called this a long time ago, and I was doing Buffy and Angel and writing X-Men and doing all this shit when none of you even cared one iota about any of this. And I deserve respect for that. And if you gave me money, those shows would have been even bigger than they were. And then they gave him money, and then he made a couple of what are considered great Marvel movies. And so I think that just fills a person's head with a lot of right or wrong. I think it's wrong, because I think that being humble is, even if it's fake humble, I think that's good to just put that out there in the world. And I think there's a lot of fake humility in the world too. And I think that's fine. I think it's just better than no humility. And so I think that you just have to put it out there and be like, you can know your big dick swings, dude. I mean, we all get it. But I never understood mistreating the people around you that help realize a vision or your vision. And you can have an iron fist without and let the buck stop with you without treating people like shit. But I really do think it is some combination of that. I really think he's like, dude, I wrote Firefly 20 years ahead of its time. I wrote Buffy the Vampire Slayer 20 years ahead of its time. If you guys listen to people like me in the 90s, you would have been so far ahead of this curve. You would have all been raking it in a long time ago. And I think that gave him a lot of power.
Yeah.
And I think
he
it's
was
really
a
that simple.
major player in like making nerd culture like two-fisted nerd culture.
Yeah,
like,
it's Comic-Con culture. I mean, he is a nexus between all of it.
Yeah, and he really, and he has a mind for it. Yeah, it's a shame that, it's so interesting to see different perspectives and, the way we were raised, the way an individual's raised, and humility being like this foreign notion. Like I can't even see that the way I was raised. Like I wasn't, but somebody might have not been raised like to recognize even what that is. There's no training for that. So it is interesting, but you have other visionaries. I'll say this. It is very odd for somebody to be working in Hollywood, in feature films, specifically in Hollywood, specifically with companies as large as Disney, right? That you have to realize you're in a collaborative art form. You're not some painter painting somewhere in a studio. You're not even an indie filmmaker. You're working in the studio system. Like this is a collaborative. You're working with directors and ADs and writers and actors, and it's a conglomerate of creatives. Like you have to be collaborative. Like that's part of the game. Now, show running, being the ship being steered by one sort of creative vision, one all-encompassing creative vision. I get it. Like that's totally fine. But there's other people I would put in this same position: Phil Miller and Chris Lord, James Gunn, Jon Favreau, Pete Docter, like these guys, Drew Goddard. I mean, there's other people that could do it successfully, and maybe they have a blip, some sort of controversy and they have some blip. These people are in the public purview. Things are going to happen, but it is interesting that this guy came under fire and then that flack only seemed to build over time. It's going to be interesting to see like how it goes. But yeah, I was interested in before I heard of the alleged sexual allegations that may have been one or two things that I heard wind of. It was interesting to me that in this case, it wasn't a Harvey Weinstein thing. It was somebody who just really acted like a bully and really just was somebody who was so aggressive and mean that, people were coming out and being like, yeah, he's impossible. It was like, I don't know. I guess you hear of the old tyrants like John Ford in Hollywood and stuff like that, or even Alfred Hitchcock, the way he treated his actors and stuff. But it seemed to go generations and that wasn't really the case. And then all of a sudden you hear about somebody like, like Joss Whedon, and it's like, oh yeah, I guess that could kind of still exist. So I don't know. It's interesting.
I was just going to say, I think he probably looks at something like The Expanse on Amazon. Awesome show, awesome series of books. And he thinks he's just like, Jesus, man, like I was making this stuff a long time ago and I didn't get any money and I didn't get any support and no one cared and it was schlock or considered that. Like, it's funny. Buffy and Angel has a little bit of respect these days, but no, that stuff was considered horrible back in the day.
Yeah, it was camp.
Yeah, it was awful. Like WB, CW type UPN shit. No one wanted to watch that stuff unless you were a little girl or something. But somehow people really did low key like it, and it came to an Alias and all this stuff. It just came to grow.
Alias too, yeah.
In all of these different ways. So I just think a lot of it has to do with that, and I'm confident he'll be back. He'll have a good idea and it'll be or it could be a John Lasseter type situation where you basically just extract value from the person without ever acknowledging them publicly ever again. And that might be the safest way to do it, is just bring him in, use him behind the scenes, keep him out of harm's way. Because that's how John Lasseter is a whole different story, because as I understand his situation, and I'm sure you know a lot more about it than I do, but he was inappropriate, but it seemed like he was just more aloof and like not aware of what he was doing more than sinister like this was.
Getting overly physical.
Right. Like,
hugging too much.
Yeah, like, and I'm sure it's not comfortable and I'm sure it's not okay and all that, but I just think there are like many different degrees. And like you said, Weinstein's on the other opposite, like rape end of of it. So there's just a lot of different ways, or like Cosby, right? It's like, there's a lot of different ways to interpret it. So, but yeah, a discussion around Joss Whedon is certainly important to bring up as we wrap things up here. Is there anything else you want to say before we go, Dig?
You know, I just had a great time with it. I mean, just little touches, it really did call back that Spielberg, Zemeckis sort of 1980s film cleverness. It's interesting that you brought that up earlier in the conversation, Kyle, because there were little things like they're talking about, like the little bit with the Hadley character really coveting this merman meeting and wanting the merman to be dredged up so that he could be the torturing murder horror villain, right? So, and they're saying, and then Citizen's trying to comfort him, and he's saying like, oh, you know, they're a mess to clean up anyway. And you're thinking like, really? Like, what does that mean? But later it turns out they have the blowhole. So when they're eating their victim, the blood and the guts spurt out the blowhole. Like those little shit like that they actually call back. Like they'll allude to it and then they'll actually play it out later in the film. It's really clever writing. And supposedly they wrote it, Goddard and Whedon wrote it like in a weekend in a hotel room where they just kind of sequestered themselves and were like, we're not going to come out. We'll spend 2 or 3 nights. We're not going to come out until this is done. You take this half, you take this half, and then we'll kind of blend them. And then they had, you know, and I think, you know, it's one of those things it's nice that it was a special, as my friend Tom would often say at the animation studio back then, of like, yeah, you got to see this thing. And always kind of wondering, my curiosity was always piqued in the back of my brain. Like, oh, I got to check this out. Like Tom used to fawn over this thing. So it was nice to finally see it. And it was a nice way to wrap up. Kind of a cool way to wrap up our knockback October for this year, and
definitely
had a good time with it.
Me too. Sig, let's wrap it up now with the dad joke.
Okay, I have one here for us. Okay, Halloween dad joke on Halloween for you guys. This comes from our friend Danny Mitzner. I'm not sure if Danny's ever contributed before. This might be the first one for him. Danny says, Kyle, why can't ghosts have babies?
I don't know.
Because they have Halloweenies. That one got me thinking when I first read Danny's joke. I was like, wait a second.
That's pretty good.
Such a thing. They could have a Halloweenie and still. But anyway.
Is he saying it's sense. Like a Halloweenie? Like, what exactly is he saying? I mean, maybe we need more information. Well, nonetheless, Dig, I appreciate the joke. I appreciate your time for this on Cabin in the Woods 2012. Go check it out if you haven't seen it already. I hope you have, if you've gotten this far into the podcast. And of course, thank you for your love, kindness, and support of all things Knockback. We could not do it without you on Last Day Media's Patreon as well. And yeah, that's basically it. We'll see you next time for more. Until then, goodbye. Knockback, a retro and nostalgia podcast, is a product and trademark of Last Stand Media and Collins Last Stand LLC, and is recorded from Central Virginia and the Philadelphia suburbs, USA. The show was conceived by and is produced by me, Colin Moriarty. My co-host is Dagan Moriarty. Knockback's executive producer is Dustin Furman, and the show is edited by associate producer Ben Smith. As you know, all of Last Stand Media's shows, including Knockback, are fan-funded on Patreon at patreon.com/laststandmedia. The following names are at the producer support level or higher on Patreon, and we're grateful for your kindness and generosity.